Eamonn Holmes, live at Drive.
On Talk Radio.
OK, Jeremy Corbyn. Photographs of Jeremy Corbyn laying a wreath at a memorial for Palestinian terrorists thought to be involved with the murder of Israeli athletes at the 1972 Olympics emerged over the weekend. Now, the Labour Party has said that Corbyn was in fact at a memorial in Tunisia to commemorate victims of bombing, an Israeli bombing in 1985 of the Palestinian Liberation Organisation. Critics say this is another example of Corbyn alienating the Jewish population. Labour are yet to accept the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism. I think there's one clause which they will not adopt there. Mr Corbyn today has said that he was present at this wreath laying, but he was not involved. OK, I've said it before on this programme, that is the equivalent to me of I did not inhale, I did not have sex with this woman. Can you be present and not involved? Here's Glyn Secker, Glyn Secretary of the Jewish Voice for Labour. What do you think, Glyn?
Good afternoon, good evening. I'm the Secretary of Jewish Voice for Labour. We've got a very clear position on this. Corbyn is being hounded by the press, and on this particular story, there's a very interesting analysis of it on Squawk Box. Now, they took some graphic experts to look at the different images. What they discovered was that there are actually two different gravestones here, two different plaques, and the picture that the Daily Mail has of Corbyn laying a wreath conveniently doesn't photograph, it cuts off the plaque. So there are two different graves here. So Corbyn was at the ceremony, and it's probably two graves in the same graveyard, and that's what he's remembering, but it's a different grave, and they've fixed the photos, and that's what's at the root of this.
So you swallow present but not involved. Do you accept that?
Well, he was present because there was a ceremony to a different grave, which was the victims of all those who lost their lives, which is what he recounts as being there for. And it's not to lay a wreath, as he said, to the person, the CEO, who actually committed these crimes, or some of the crimes. So it's a very clear distinction. We're talking, someone's asking him to remember an event several years ago, and that's clearly quite difficult, and he can remember the general event. I know Corbyn personally. He would never support anyone who commits such terrible acts. He's against.
Well, why doesn't he just apologise to Jewish people for any embarrassment he may have caused? It's simple.
Well, the embarrassment is created by the story that's run by the newspaper.
Well, no one can make any sense of what he said. 1 minute he was there, next minute he wasn't. Then he's taking part, then he's not taking part. He says a wreath was indeed led by some of those who attended the conference to those that were killed in Paris in 1992. And then he was asked, was he involved in the wreath laying? He said, I was present when it was led. I don't think I was actually involved in it, despite last year saying, I led a wreath to all those who died in the air attack that took place in Tunis on the headquarters of the Palestinian organisations. What is the story? What's the story?
That's the story. There are, maybe two events happening at the same time. Some other people, while they're there, laying a wreath to another grave, and he's present, and so he remembers being present, but he didn't lay a wreath to the CEO. And that's it. And it's terribly easy for the newspapers to fabricate these stories, ask people to remember details from years before, and difficult for him to give a very clear, on-the-spot response. Let's be clear about what's happening here. The agenda is those who are opposed to Corbyn becoming Prime Minister are trying to take him down with these accusations of anti-Semitism. I'm Jewish. I know Corbyn well. I've spoken on the same platforms as him. I've spoken in Finsbury Park Mosque with him. He does not have an ounce of anti-Semitism in him.
Oh, but he doesn't have an ounce of apology in him as well. I mean, he's obviously not in favour of the Israeli state. I mean, you say you're Jewish. I've got a Jewish co-presenter with me now in the form of Tanya Breyer. Tanya, you've heard what Glyn's saying. Glyn's saying there's a big political plot to bring Jeremy Corbyn down. This is part of it.
Glyn, with all due respect, and what I would say to you, if it was just a political plot, then, I mean, he's giving them the material. I mean, it can't, if all these accusations of anti-Semitism are, as you say, in your opinion, not real and shouldn't be applied to Jeremy Corbyn, then where's it all coming from? You know, we've been hearing these for the last months, for the last year. There's been arguing about it. Labour has come across, unfortunately, as the nasty party.
Tell me, has anyone who's been suspended or any of the leading people who have been expelled from the Labour Party been accused and convicted of anti-Semitism? They haven't. Livingston hasn't. Mark Wadsworth
But why
hasn't.
is it still there?
Margaret Hodge thinks he's anti-Semitic.
Margaret Hodge was going to be investigated until they realised, actually, we shouldn't investigate her.
Oh, well, hang on a minute. What did she call Corbyn? What language did she use? Be honest about that.
Well, I think she said he was anti-Semitic.
Yes,
I think
exactly. She used something that
she
people...
She said he was anti-Semitic, but can you tell me the adjective? It was one beginning with the letter F, right, which I'm not wanting to use on the air.
Why does that make her wrong?
Yeah, I mean, Glyn,
if Corbyn had used the F word, can you imagine the press's reaction?
What's that got to do with the price of bread?
No, but for Dame Margaret Hodge to be investigated because of something she felt so passionately
because she says F.
about.
You think she should be expelled, do you?
Expelled?
Well, some people would say Corbyn is the master of weasel words in all of this. He's all things to all people.
No. There is not a wave of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. Certainly there are.
Okay, so how can you then allay people's fears, Glyn? You tell the Jewish community who are feeling incredibly uncomfortable, you tell them then why
Excuse me, who's speaking for the Jewish community?
She's speaking as a Jew. She's speaking as a Jew. You're obviously not. You're obviously not speaking for them. And surely Jeremy Corbyn is doing a numbers game in all of this. He calculates there's 300,000 of you in the UK and you don't matter about whether he will be re-elected or not.
No, wait a minute. Which bodies claim to speak for all the Jews in this country?
No idea. I'm not a Jew. I don't know.
You know what, Glyn? No one is claiming to speak for every... Because you can't. You speak as an individual, Glyn. But why is it happening within the Labour Party now? Why is it happening?
You're asking me questions.
I'm asking you because you are the Secretary of Jewish Voice for Labour. So why is it happening?
I'm telling you, but you don't want to listen to my answers. I'm listening. Okay, good. Thank you. There is a souped-up campaign of a wave of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, which hundreds of us Jews in the Labour Party do not recognise at all. And the reason for that campaign is to silence criticism of Israel and to attack Corbyn because of his politics, his general socialist politics. I'm sorry, but when you examine the evidence, you see masses of anti-Semitism in the social media, on Twitter, on Facebook, but it does not emanate from the Labour Party.
Okay, Glyn,
there's no evidence of that.
Okay, Glyn. As Secretary of Jewish Voice for Labour and as a Jew yourself, do you not say to your esteemed leader, listen, boss, this isn't playing out very well. We understand your opposition of the Israeli state and your criticism of all things Israeli state. That's fine. But to ordinary Jewish people in this country and around the world, boss, why don't you just come out and say nothing against you folks? But he hasn't done it.
Said that. He's said many times he's not anti-Semitic. What he has said is that...
What is he? What is he? If he's not anti-Semitic, what is he when it comes to Israel and Jewish people? What is he?
I'll tell you very clearly. You cannot ally those two. You cannot ally Israel with the Jewish people. There are hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Jews around the world who do not support the current nature of the state of Israel, which is very different to saying they don't think Israel should exist. I don't say that. I am highly critical of the way Israel behaves towards the Palestinians, committing legions of human rights violations. There are 40 organisations around the world which have signed a statement criticising the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism. There are many opinions in the Jewish community.
Can I ask you something? Do you feel, Glyn, you ever have to choose between your politics and your religion?
No, because, I personally am not religious, but there are Orthodox Jews.
Does that not explain? Does that not explain a lot if you're not religious?
No, it doesn't explain anything, because half the Jews in Israel are not religious. There are lots of secular Jews in Israel. Okay.
Well, I don't know how I could speak for Catholics in Ireland if I wasn't practicing. You know, I don't really see why you've got a legitimate voice if you're not a practicing Jew.
I'm talking about Jews in Israel.
Yes, but anybody just trying to put this in anybody's everyday language. How can you speak for Jews in Israel if you're not Jewish? If you don't practice?
I am Jewish.
But you say you don't practice.
I feel very strongly that I'm Jewish.
But you wouldn't be offended. You may not be offended. You may not be offended as much as people who are practicing then.
No, that's not true. We have Orthodox Jews in Jewish Voice for Labour who say exactly the same as I'm saying, who actually say that Israel and what it's doing does not stand for Jewish values, for core Jewish values.
And what about the Labour Party, Glyn? Just to say, as you have actually admitted and said that there is anti-Semitism within the Labour Party, does that not doesn't that sadden you?
Of course, but it's probably less than the incidence of anti-Semitism in the country as a whole. I've seen and argued with individuals, and there are very few of them. It's not a wave. It's not anything to do with an atmosphere in the Labour Party. Certainly there's no existential threat to Jews in the Labour Party. It's a small number. It's about education and training, and the few who won't be educated and change their minds, they should be expelled, and some of them have been, and that's quite right.
300,000 Jews in the UK. How many of them do you think would vote Corbyn or vote Labour under Corbyn?
Oh, I don't know. Actually, the support for Jews in the Labour Party, according to YouGov polls, has gone up since Corbyn was in.
Really?
It has, yes.
Okay. Thanks very much. Glyn Secker is Secretary of Jewish Voice for Labour, even though he's not a practicing Jew. So that's what he does, okay? Very interesting. What I think, Tanya, about all of this is, I think this is more likely to annoy generally. You can take it as read that there will not be support for Jeremy Corbyn or Labour under Jeremy Corbyn within the Jewish community. But I think this is more likely to affect people who are that floating vote and think, would I vote Labour? Would I vote Corbyn next time around? Well, judging on his attitude here, I think it's more likely to maybe impact on those sort of people.
I think so. I think the floating voters...
who are not necessarily Jewish.
No, exactly. They could be any religion. Yeah. Any religion, Eamonn. And I think it's just this intolerance, and I think it's almost allowing people... OK, what Glyn is saying could be true. Maybe Jeremy Corbyn is not anti-Semitic himself, but by not actually coming out and being clear, by not actually coming out to apologise if people have been offended, it gives the right for people to get out there, and a little on the same with Islamophobia as well on the other side too. It gives the right to people to actually say anti-Semitic things, make people feel uncomfortable. And we look to our leaders. You look to the leader of the Labour Party to actually lead and not to fuel the flames of what people are uncomfortable with.
Also, I think politicians have this art of not saying straight things to anybody normal. You can come out and you can make a statement which distance yourself from this or that and makes your point particularly clear. But weasel words. That's
actually John McDonnell the other day did come out and say something very simple, very straight, and he said this is hurting to the core of the party, and he did come out, which was very interesting. He came out much stronger than Corbyn did.
Indeed.